Hey, everybody. I'm Gene Hyde. I'm head of special collections here at UNC Asheville and host of the Ramsey Library Brown Bag series. And we're delighted today to have Alex Mitchell and Emma Olson from the North Carolina Center for Health and Wellness with us. Alex, Emma?
Thanks, Gene. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us today. We're really excited to connect with you in this way and to share information about a project we did in partnership with the Verner Center for Early Learning. The project is to understand the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and recommendations for pregnant persons and families with young children in our community. My name is Emma Olson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Evaluation with the North Carolina Center for Health and Wellness, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our work in just a second. But first, I want to ask my colleague Alex to introduce herself as well, please.
Hello, I'm Alex Mitchell. I'm the Culture of Results Coordinator at the NC Center for Health and Wellness, and I also use she, her pronouns.
Thanks, Alex. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I want to just take a moment for reflection and to promote our own resilience. This project was a community assessment, and it's focused in particular on the impact of COVID-19 on the population that this Head Start program serves and could serve overall. I also tried to bring a trauma-informed lens to this work. And so we want to try to introduce a resilience-informed lens to this presentation as well. I want to recognize that we are all still experiencing the impacts of this pandemic in many profound ways. So the assessment concluded in May, but many of the results that we'll be talking about today are ongoing. And even if we are not pregnant persons or families with young children, those results might resonate with us in very personal ways as well. So I want to acknowledge that and invite you to take special care of yourself for the next hour that we have together and beyond in whatever way that looks like for you. We are not in the beautiful archives room of the UNC Asheville Library sharing snickerdoodles together. We're coming from all these different places across the campus, across the community and beyond. And I would invite us, because we're kind of coming from scattered places, to try to be as present as we can together today. I would invite us to find a particularly deep breath together before we begin. So you might want to ground in your seat, take a moment to pause and breathe in. And release. And I know that being present looks a little bit different now than it used to in these brown bag conversations. So we welcome your presence in whatever way is accessible for you today. And that might be with the video on. We'd love to see your face if that feels comfortable. If you prefer to have your video off and you need to be making or eating your lunch while we're talking, we really invite you to do that as well and to enjoy whatever it is you're doing and however you can be with us today. Next slide, please. Our hopes for today are to share with you a little bit more about what NCCHW does and our Culture of Results initiative in particular. I recognize that we can be somewhat siloed across this campus and we may not all be familiar with each other's work, so this is a great opportunity to connect across these dimensions. We are primarily here to discuss this particular project, this community assessment in partnership with Verner and others, and the results of this research, and to highlight some resources or some findings that may be valuable to your own work. We are also excited about a new aspect of this work. We incorporated an asset-based approach into our primary data collection in particular, and a resilience-focused approach. And so we'll touch on that a little bit, but if that's something you're excited about learning more about, we'll have some time at the end for final discussion, and I'd really invite your questions and comments. We do really want to have a conversation at the end of this. One final point of note, this presentation was adapted from one that we gave to the Buncombe County Community Health Assessment and Improvement Advisory Council. Not going to talk too much about the larger community health assessment and improvement processes in general. Again, if that's something you're excited about, we welcome your questions and comments. We've got some partners in that work here today as well. And I'm currently the chair of the advisory council. So if you're curious about learning more, we'd love to talk in the discussion about that. But just so you know, the results that we're presenting were brought to that advisory council, and our particular focus for that work for the last cycle is on birth equity and mental health. So we highlighted results that were relevant to those focus areas in a little bit more detail on this presentation. So as I said, I want to talk briefly about the NC Center for Health and Wellness. We are based here at UNC Asheville, and we work across the state with a primary focus of promoting health equity, advancing fair opportunities for healthier communities across North Carolina. We do that in multiple ways. We try to build the capacity of a network of providers that touch health and social drivers of health in all different kinds of strategies. We impact policies through advocacy efforts, and we ignite communities into action. And so you may see aspects of that show up in this particular project. As Director of Partnerships and Evaluation, I lead our Culture of Results initiative. And this is a training and technical assistance program that again works with all different kinds of providers, both locally, regionally, and across the state to assist with planning, evaluating, improving the efforts of what they do. And we use one framework, results-based accountability, quite deeply in all of the different projects. So you'll hear RBA referenced briefly. This presentation is not explicitly about RBA. There are a lot of resources on our collaborative research page, which is linked here, on the Culture of Results webpage, which is also linked here if you want to learn more, or again, ask at the end. And what we'll be talking about today is also linked on that collaborative research page. So you could read the full report, both from this last project and the initial one on those web pages. So that is the grounding and background context that I wanted to provide. And now we can dig into this particular project. The purpose of this project was several-fold. First and foremost, Verner is a federally funded Head Start program. And so they are required to do a community assessment on the population that they serve or could serve. So pregnant persons and families with children under the age of 5. They're required to do this every 3 years in depth and update it annually. So we were able to partner with them for the original assessment in 2019. And again, for this update, which covers a 2020 through 2021 period and ended in May of this past year. As I said, these full reports are available on the collaborative research webpage if you're interested in reading them in more detail. And there's some really inspiring quotes that we're not going to be sharing today. So I'd invite you to check those out if you're interested. We really want to lift up this partner. We've been really grateful to work with Verner. I actually see that we have one of our partners from Verner here on this call. Thanks for coming today. And I want to recognize that while this is a federally required project, the community assessment, we've really appreciated working with Verner because they've been very intentional about how they use the data and the results of this. So the goal of this assessment is really to inform programmatic growth and changes, service system decisions, advocacy efforts, hopefully to help make the case for larger funding if you're demonstrating certain unmet needs, and really to grow as a result. And so it's been a pleasure partnering with different folks from Verner in various ways through the last 3 years or so, 2 years, because we can still count in pandemic times in order to do this project. So I just wanted to recognize that. One caveat, when I talk about a community assessment, I am talking about population level data. So theoretically, these are metrics that are reflective of the community at large, or in this case, a demographic group in the community. So pregnant people and families with young children were of particular importance for this community assessment. For the primary data collection process, as we'll talk about in a moment, we only received 65 responses total. And those responses were not the demographics that we collected, the information on things like race, ethnicity, gender are not representative. They're not exactly the same as our community overall. So we don't feel comfortable assuming that the results of this primary data survey are generalizable to the community at large. That's an important distinction that I want to make. And it's different than how our community level assessment across the county for our general health improvement process works. So it feels really important to highlight that. And what we're talking about today can really be considered more of a snapshot of the experiences of this population that we're combining with some local and national research, but not necessarily a wholly representative illustration of the needs or challenges, the assets or strengths, the recommendations and opportunities for working with this group of people. So that feels really important to highlight from the outset. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our methodology for this community assessment that was done in partnership with Werner. We started out with a review of relevant literature and secondary data. This was not a full academic literature review, so not a formal one, more of a review of existing literature or literature that we found through various searches and through partners that was deemed to be most relevant to the focus of this project. We also reviewed secondary data. I really want to highlight one source in particular that we use over and over in our research. This is the Western North Carolina Healthy Impacts workbook on the community health assessment data. It incorporates both primary data that they collect through a really amazing collaborative approach and secondary data from all different sources. And if you're not familiar with this data source and you're working in research, working with students, or just curious about what's going on in our community, I really encourage you to check out this website. They're actually releasing the new data on Friday. Very exciting. This is a big day in my life, y'all. And we have one of the partners from that organization that's also on this call. So if you have questions for them, we've got a great person in the room to help answer them. We also looked at validated tools to build our own instrument off of. Our instrument was a primary survey that we conducted for pregnant people and families with young children. We drew from 3 validated tool sources in particular. One was explicitly focused on the impact of COVID. We drew from a collection of instruments we've used over the last 10 years through the community health assessment. And then one other really important source was research on measuring what's called allostatic load, or a community accumulated level of stress and resilience through key informant interviews. So those were 3 of the big sources that we used. And then we modified aspects of these tools with input from key community partners. I want to give a big shout out to Marta, who I'll talk about just a little bit more in a moment. She served as our language justice consultant. This was the first time we really tried to intentionally take an asset-based and language justice approach to our work. A lot of important research on what an asset-based lens can do for individuals and communities. So we were really excited to partner with Marta in that way. We also partnered with 3 individuals representing community-based organizations to make sure that the data we were collecting could drive strategic decisions. So we didn't want to just produce an assessment that sat on a shelf. We wanted to understand what key partners were already doing or thinking about doing as they grow, and what kind of data would help them grow and make those important decisions in their policies and programs. We applied for and received IRB approval, and we were able to distribute the survey in both English and Spanish for a couple weeks over April. You'll see it's a relatively short data collection period. This was a year project overall, and because of all the other steps involved and the deadline for the funder, we had only 3 weeks to collect the data. So that was one factor for the sample size being relatively small. We cleaned the data, we analyzed it, aggregated it, and then reported on the outcomes and synthesized with those other data sources, the secondary data sources. And that's what you'll be hearing about today. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned some of these partners, but I really do want to lift them up. Marta has been an incredible force and a source of support in my life and my work over the last 5 years in Nashville. And She recently launched a program in partnership with some other leaders in the racial equity space called Supportive Accountability. So if you're interested in growing your own ability to be an accountable ally or partner with communities of color, I encourage you to check out this website as well. We want to thank Deanna Lamont, Aaron B., and Caitlin Gruyere for the insights they gave into both the survey instrument and the strategies their agencies were considering to ensure that our methods and the data we collected would be useful. I really want to thank every person who responded to the survey. I'm always amazed by the insights, the experiences, the challenges, and the ideas that our participants share with us when we collect research. And I also want to give a shout out to the agencies that leveraged the trusted networks that they've built over many years doing their work to distribute the survey. So CHIP Advisory Council members really helped me reach a broader audience, and I'm grateful for their support in this work as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the original assessment was done in 2019, and we used an RBA process called a whole distance exercise, which is a way of engaging community members in co-designing and planning strategies or approaches to a particular issue. So this is a picture of our amazing team from Werner, who through that process helped us identify 7 key focus areas for our original assessment. We maintained these focus areas in the assessment update. So in the presentation today and in the results and in the full report, you will see results presented within these different sections. And those sections were identified through the input of these different partners. At this point, I will pass it off to Alex, who's going to talk about the results.
Thank you, Emma. So as Emma mentioned, we used an online survey to collect data asking pregnant persons and families with young children who lived in Buncombe County about the challenges and strengths they experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and very early 2021. We were able to get 65 responses, and all but one of those were in English. So the first question we asked was, thinking about your life over the past year and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which ways have you or your immediate family members been affected? Results showed the most common effects of the COVID-19 pandemic over the past year were the following. 81.5% of respondents or their immediate family members experienced more isolation or loneliness. 70.8% experienced greater stress, anxiety, or depression. 47.7% lost or had difficulty arranging childcare, and 38.5% canceled, postponed, or avoided care because of COVID concerns. While many of the respondents shared negative experiences during the pandemic, we also found that people had positive experiences. Almost 20% felt a greater connection to their community, family, and friends. 60% were able to work from home, which of course did come with its own set of challenges, which we'll touch on later. And 43.1% were able to access needed medical care through telehealth services. So our first focus area is education. Of the almost 50% of respondents who stated that they lost or had difficulty accessing childcare, they shared a variety of reasons for this. The leading two were worries about COVID risks as well as cost. We also saw this lack of access to childcare contribute to effects on parents and pregnant people's mental health during the pandemic. Which brings us to focus area 2, health and mental health. Mental health was affected not only by the loss of reliable childcare for many, but also by the changes in social behaviors resulting from lockdowns and social distancing. The majority of respondents, about 71%, shared that they experienced greater stress, anxiety, or depression, and an even higher number, almost 82%, shared that they experienced more isolation and loneliness. This is significantly higher than national data collected in June 2020, showing that 27% of parents reported worsening mental health for themselves since the pandemic began. This indicates that the mental health and health impacts may become more prevalent and significant over time. While this survey did not stratify by demographic characteristics, this national data indicated that mental health impacts of the pandemic tended to be more significant among female and unmarried respondents. The research also correlated negative mental health with loss of childcare, delays in healthcare visits, and worsened food insecurity. A very, very small subsample of respondents to our survey, 2 people, shared that they were pregnant or had very recently given birth during the pandemic. And both reported that this was an incredibly challenging and isolating time to both be pregnant or to be a new parent. The experience of these community members are reflected in research. Pregnancy has been shown to increase risk for experiencing severe symptoms from COVID-19, making it even more important to limit contact with others. However, while ensuring the protection for the pregnant person and baby, this created more isolation and rapidly increasing feelings of depression and anxiety in one survey of pregnant women during the pandemic. So while mental health frequently suffered as a result of isolation during the pandemic, there were ways that people found to connect with each other, which brings us to our next focus area, food and nutrition. Food was frequently named as a way that respondents felt they could connect and help their communities. This was seen in increased donations to organizations that assisted those experiencing food insecurity, such as Manna Food Bank, as well as personal offers to cook for neighbors and friends. Food also became scarce or scarcer for some respondents. 12.5% of respondents reported receiving food from a food pantry, food bank, church, or other place that provides free food distributions in the last year, with nearly half of those reporting that this was the first time that they had used those services. About 14% of respondents shared that they had used government-funded food aid program WIC or SNAP in the past year, but only a small percentage said that this was their first time using those services. Research from Feeding America reports that those most likely to experience food insecurity in the pandemic were close to experiencing or already experiencing food insecurity prior to the pandemic, which may explain the low number of first-time users. Overall, Feeding America estimates that 45 million people, including 15 million children, experienced food insecurity in 2020, and that was a 10 million person increase from 2019. The next focus area we looked at was housing. No respondents reported utilizing services around eviction prevention. However, one respondent shared that rental assistance from the Department of Social Services supported them during the pandemic. This may be one area where survey responses are not reflective of the extent of challenges across the community, as we have seen that housing prices, both in rental and purchased homes, have been a challenge in Buncombe County and were potentially exacerbated during the pandemic. Focus area 5 concerned income and employment. Many respondents to our survey were able to work remotely and experienced both positive and negative impacts. Many respondents were glad to have the option to work from home, but when paired with limited childcare options, there were challenges that affected people's mental health. And while many of our respondents were able to work from home, national data has shown that there is inequity in who is able to access this privilege. National data shows that low-income and Hispanic parents are less likely to be able to work from home. Of the 65 respondents, 14 lost a job and 16 were furloughed or worked reduced hours. The Human Rights Watch estimates that 74.7 million Americans have lost jobs over the course of the pandemic, with much of that burden in industries that are low wage. And this means that those most affected by job loss are already low income and likely close to or already living in poverty. In addition to this burden on low-income workers, job loss in the pandemic has disproportionately affected women and mothers. Women represent a large share of low-income workers in the US. The Brookings Institute reports that in 2019, prior to the pandemic, 46% of working women held low-wage positions. And these were the positions that were hit hardest during the pandemic. This brings us to the next focus area of social services. About 44% of survey respondents shared that they were fortunate to not have to access extra social services during the pandemic. Outside of the previously discussed food assistance program, services that were utilized included assistance funds, emergency services, homeless shelters, Buncombe County Health Department, and healthcare clinics or urgent care clinics. And the final area I'll discuss today, excuse me, is social support during the pandemic. As mentioned earlier, there were instances of people feeling more connected to their community and those around them. Many shared that knowing they were all in this together and having similar experiences aided their feelings of resilience in the pandemic and helped to reduce their feelings of isolation. These informal systems of support improved people's mental health and made them feel that they were not going through the pandemic alone. However, overall, primary data showed that levels of social support significantly varied across respondents. While some benefited greatly from the support from family, neighbors, friends, or community groups, others felt isolated and alone in their challenges. Survey data revealed 3 key types of social support were present in the community: emotional, instrumental, so things like aids and services, and informational, and how these could be, how important these can be in building resilience for families and communities. National research around the effects of social support during the pandemic affirms this local data and has found that while many people experience similar feelings of isolation, others also felt increased connectedness and social support. Psychological traits such as gratitude, resilience, and grit were found to protect against feelings of isolation and loneliness during this time. So that was an overview of our key findings from this community assessment update. And with that, I will pass the mic back over to Emma, who's going to lead us in a final discussion of the results.
Thank you so much, Alex. Next slide, please. So we have a couple of discussion questions or prompts that we would offer today. But as I said, we are also open to just having a conversation about various aspects of this project or the results that piqued your own interests that might be applicable to your work. So Alex, if you'll put the first prompt up, if anybody feels like sharing something that stuck out to them or surprised them, we would love to hear what of this presentation resonated with you, or if you have any open questions or comments and just want to share those back, we welcome it as well.
To say something. I work in special collections with Jean. My name's Ashley Whittle. I'm sorry I was late today. I'm going to catch the recording to catch the first part of this. I was one of the respondents in this, and this is who I was pregnant with during this survey. This is Brenna, and she's 7 months old now. I'd like to know, are you guys planning on doing a follow-up survey?
Thank you so much, first of all, Ashley, for responding to the survey and being here. I don't think I've ever actually gotten to see a research participant come back and read the findings, and I've certainly never gotten to see a baby attend our presentation who was represented in the data. So this is a really special moment for us. Thanks for being here. So we have not talked with Werner about what their plans are for the next assessment cycle. There are community assessments that reflect on strengths, assets, and needs that are done every 3 years. And that's the data that's going to be released publicly tomorrow, actually. But if anyone from Werner feels comfortable talking about what they might envision as part of the next assessment process, you would be welcome to do that. But I don't want to put you on the spot either.
First of all, I want to echo Emma's excitement and thanks to you, Ashley, for participating and for being here. I'm the director of the Early Head Start program at Verner. And so we have worked a lot with Emma and Alex on our community assessment process, and we don't specifically have a plan for follow-up information, but we do want to update the community assessment data annually for our program planning purposes. So it's definitely a possibility as I kind of look at our budget and what's possible in the next year. So potentially.
Thank you, Caitlin. And Ashley, I don't know at what point you joined us, but the full report is on our collaborative research page for NCCHW. So if you want to see the full findings from that primary survey and how we integrated those with other findings to provide recommendations for people like you in the community, we would welcome you to look at that report as well.
I would love to. Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? That's a hard act to follow, y'all.
Emma, this is Joe. I just wanted to say, for the small sample size that you pulled and it being specific to pregnant and new moms, I feel like it syncs with what's happening regionally really well. I mean, it basically describes what we're seeing across the region and at the county level for impacts of COVID. So I thought that was really interesting that it's so spot on.
That's really helpful, Joe. So Joe is the data specialist. I don't know if I'm getting your title right. Something like that. A data guru, a fellow data dork. We've actually worn badges about our data dorkiness together. So it means a lot to hear that while the results are not generalizable from a technical standpoint, if we triangulate them with a larger data set, we are seeing similar findings. Joe, was there anything in particular that struck you that seems aligned with the regional strengths or needs or opportunities for this population?
I think I felt like the percentages for people who lost jobs during the pandemic was really close. So like that kind of the sample that you guys got and then what we saw in the region as well felt like it was about the same. Also women, younger people being more impacted by loss of job, loss of healthcare, loss of hours, things like that. So those were the ones that struck me as being particularly related to the regional data. The resilience, it's also, I think what we saw across the region this year with the several resilience and social support questions that we did ask is that in general, our region is very resilient and does have more social support than the state and the nation. So maybe that's our little rural pocket being protected. So yeah, but those were the things that jumped out at me.
Thank you, Joe. That's really helpful information, and I think perhaps speaks to some of the grit and the compassion that's part of our Appalachian culture here. For folks who are not super familiar with the community assessment process, the network does collect primary survey data every 3 years. So that's what Joe is speaking to. Some of the questions stay the same over time and some of them change. And with this larger CHA cycle, our network of partners was particularly interested in understanding the impact of COVID, indicators related to experiences of inequity or racial oppression across community members, some questions about telehealth, and some greater resilience and social support questions as well. So those were some of the areas that our partners were passionate about digging into more deeply over the last year in that larger project. Thanks for that insight, Joe. Any other questions or comments? Alex, we could put a couple more prompts up. That might bring some folks into the conversation. So if there's anything we shared that you found particularly concerning or particularly uplifting, we'd love to hear some of those more emotional responses to this information. And if anybody gained any insights into how they might be able to incorporate some of these resources or this research into your own work, either with students or community partners, be really excited to hear that as well. So inviting those specific question responses in addition to anything else you may feel like sharing today.
Hey there, Emma, it's Richard.
Hi, Richard.
I'll jump in here and ask a question. And first off, say thank you for all your support and partnership working on the assessments. So I went right to the social support section to check on that and mental health, of course, because that's, some of the challenges that we're seeing. And that it was good to have that update. It's such a small window though for your survey back in the spring. It'd be interesting to see a longer over time or update to some of those sections to get how people are feeling over time.
Thank you, Richard. And Richard is one of our partners at Verner. Richard leads Verner's development and fundraising efforts. So it's great to have you here and see where your points of inquiry are. Some of the longer term mental health and social support impacts of COVID could potentially be reflected in the community assessment findings. Joe, do you remember any particular questions that we might have asked that could be relevant and reflective of that? It looks like she shared through the chat. I don't know how or what would be most meaningful, but this information could be shared with broader Healthy Impact partners. Okay, so I think she was actually responding to the question about how this information might be incorporated into the work overall. But Richard, we linked to the Health Network's Healthy Impact data webpage. And if you download that full data set that is available in an updated form tomorrow morning, first thing, there are some indicators that are particularly reflective of mental health and social support, both on a local level for Buncombe County and across the region. And you might find those resources could be valuable in growing your programming. I know y'all are always growing and thinking about ways to also bring a trauma-informed lens into the wraparound services that you can provide to parents and families overall. And those particular indicators on a community level could be really valuable.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. And I saw Louise put a comment in the chat box. Louise said, given the age of respondents, I was struck by the impact of social isolation and loneliness. And Louise also works with the center. She's our healthy aging results specialist and has largely been focused on our social bridging project. So supporting an initiative that connects student volunteer callers to colleagues who are primarily older adults that may be at risk for negative impacts of COVID and social isolation. Louise, do you mind sharing just a little bit about what you're seeing? I know we're just wrapping up an evaluation among that population that is actually a program evaluation, so not population level measures. But Louise, do you want to highlight anything that you've seen in your work? No pressure.
Apologies. Mostly I was just struck by the fact that that was one of the largest impacts, if not the largest impact on this population, given that my understanding is they're young and have families, whereas many of the participants in the project for older adults, the social bridging project that you referenced, are older adults, and the overwhelming majority of them live alone. So, and I had read some articles about the impact of the pandemic on rates of social isolation and loneliness in all ages, but I did not understand that it was that high. So anyway, that was what I was struck by.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing those insights, Louise. And that is something that we've found in other research we've done over the course of the pandemic as well. The center has led some of the efforts to understand the impact of our student health ambassadors on campus. And one of the surprising findings that we learned is that community partners and the campus community members, so students on campus and the student health ambassadors themselves felt like the peer-to-peer connections they made, the social support they provided was as important or perhaps even more important than the information they provided around prevention and treatment of COVID-19. So we are seeing other signs of how important it is to find ways to connect through the course of this pandemic. And Louise, thanks for highlighting that interesting difference in the populations these programs are serving. Alex, I'm really dominating the discussion section. Is there anything you want to jump in and respond to as well?
Yeah, I'll just speak to some of the things that really stuck out to me and sort of touched me personally. One was the connection that people found with their neighbors. We didn't highlight that quite so much in this presentation, but there were quite a few people that mentioned that they got to know their neighbors and neighborhoods in ways that they never would have had they not been stuck in their neighborhoods for long periods of time. And I also really appreciated the connection that food brought to people. I love food. It's like what I spend 85% of my time thinking about. And just the connectedness that created, that people could, even without seeing each other, still support each other, really warmed my heart. I like to focus on the unexpected positives that came out of the pandemic, because I think that we all get really bogged down in the negatives. So it was nice to see some silver linings.
I really appreciate that, Alex. Thanks for lifting that up. If you don't mind, can you actually go back to the slide on the greatest impact of the pandemic on people? Because I think your comment is a great segue into just providing a little bit more context to an asset-based lens. So as I mentioned earlier, we tried to use more asset-focused language. And Marta, the community partner we worked with, the consultant we work with, has a great list of words. CDC also has some guidance on equity-focused or equity-forward language that's really helpful. And one of the other ways we tried to introduce more of an asset-based focus into a community needs assessment is lifting up those silver linings, like what Alex just mentioned. So these are the multi-choice options that we asked survey respondents to indicate they could select any that apply. So when Alex went over the findings of this, we talked about more of the challenges, because those were the highest rates of things that people experienced. But I also want to lift up that some people did experience really positive benefits of the pandemic. So connecting with neighbors, as she mentioned, was one of them. Some folks experienced greater well-being and a greater connection with their own community. Some of their children thrived in a new environment. They experienced some really positive connections with family members and had other benefits as well. So we do want to lift that up. This presentation focuses on some of the more challenges and negative experiences through the light of trying to shift social service systems or advocate for funding to address some of those gaps. And I think it's important to highlight some of these positive impacts as well. So thanks for pausing there, Alex. I appreciate it. Ashley, thanks for being here. We'll make sure that we'll ask Jean and Ken's team to share the recording with the campus community. I know that there were some requests for folks who couldn't be here as well. Any other comments or reflections from audience members?
So the recording will be made available. It'll be on the special collection or on the events calendar where this was listed, and we can also share that URL with you, and you all can share it with the community as well.
Great, thank you, Jane.
Emma, this is just like a pondering, not
Yeah,
really
love it.
question, but I'm really curious to see future data on how the 0 to 5 kids were impacted during this time, because even out of my small friend group, I think like 4 out of 5 of our kids are in speech therapy right now. So seeing like what masking and not being able to see faces and hear sounds and things like that, I'm going to be fascinated to see what that looks like in 10 years.
That's a great observation. And the primary data we collected was among adults. So we did not ask children under the age of 5 or observe them in any ways to understand the impacts of the pandemic on them. Caitlin, I know typically Head Starts do some assessments through the classes, and I don't know if you could speak to any other observations that your team has had during the course of the pandemic about how children might be thriving differently, or any concerns that ever emerged from your team?
Yeah, sure. That is definitely, it's like nodding vigorously. Like, yes, we're definitely interested in seeing that impact as well. And we have seen just in our ongoing assessment data that communication and language was one of the areas in which we saw kind of a pattern of children not quite being where we might expect them to be developmentally. So we've put a heavy focus on that in our curriculum, and how can we, making sure teachers have masks that have those little windows in them, because it is very important for them to be able to see the facial expressions and how we make those sounds. We also just have had to put a lot of, in the especially birth to 3 age group, social emotional development is the biggest focus anyway. But with the sort of constant changes in routines that we're seeing, because we still, we have children who might be coming to school every day and then their classroom closes for 3 weeks because there's an exposure of COVID in their classroom, and then they're coming back and we're having to kind of readjust them to being in the classroom versus whatever sort of childcare situation their family was able to put together during that closure. There's definitely just that kind of lack of routine is something that we're really having to kind of help support children and families in maintaining routines as much as possible in, whatever this situation is that we're in. So it's definitely impactful. And it also, we have seen a lot of resilience from our families and how they've been able to manage and still provide those safe places and connections for their children. And so that's been really uplifting to see in among the mess, is just, families appreciating the support of each other in the community.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. That's really helpful context. And it's great hearing how your team can navigate some of those challenges quickly. I saw Louise put a comment in the chat box that it might be interesting to look at this even in 2 years. And so there's sort of that larger public health issue of trying to mitigate strategies and mitigate challenges with emerging strategies, and understand longer term impacts and reflect and respond to those as well. So thank you. And I will just say, generally speaking, as a field, we do a better job of collecting data on adults, and it's pretty challenging getting robust shared data for children, and especially young children. So it's really great to hear from a community partner who has firsthand insight, what some of the challenges might be. And I know Buncombe County is really focused on early childhood interventions right now. And so the advocacy efforts to put funding and resources into our young population are working, and it's wonderful. I know that y'all just received some funding for expanding early Head Start programming, the hours, thinking through wraparound services. So just great that you're able to reflect and respond to some of those emergent needs as they arise. And thanks for sharing that observation, Joe. That's a vulnerable one, and sounds like a challenge that you and your close community are going through. So we appreciate your sharing that and pondering that with us. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, we will close here then. Alex and I can stay on for a couple of minutes after we wrap up in case folks had individual questions or comments that they don't feel comfortable sharing with the full group, but we really, again, appreciate your being here with us during your lunch hour today. If you want to follow up on anything you heard, the best way to contact us is through email. We're not always in the Cheryl Center as we once were, but thanks for being here today and connecting in this way, and for all you do to support our communities.